I was sensitive, I was interested, I was looking, but I decided I couldn't screw around anymore. And I needed to, and that's when I met Dave Ballou, just very serendipitously, right before I was to leave town. I wandered into this parking lot and met Dave Ballou, and just, it was like I was a bell, and I got struck for the first time, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I saw these paintings. And
just from meeting him and seeing his paintings in like a parking lot? Is that correct?
Yes.
Wow.
That's correct.
Wow. And a bell went off, a light. It was just like, wow, here it is. How could I have missed it?
I was married at the time to a woman, and we were traveling, and we were both interested in New Mexico, maybe as a place that we would like to move to. And we were just visiting. And we had checked out of our hotel. We were ready to get our shuttle back down to the airport in Albuquerque. I walk into this parking lot and I meet Dave Ballou, and it's like, I wrote him a couple days later. I said, "Do you need anybody to sweep out your studio?" But and I think I might have been drawing and painting a little bit, but Dave said, "Well, this is great, Bill. If you like my work, that's fantastic. Thank you. But you got to go meet Mike Lynch." And so I looked up Mike Lynch. I found that he was teaching in Scottsdale. I went out and met Mike Lynch in the early 90s in Scottsdale. And Mike was just a sweet, sweet guy to me, and took me under his wings. And he's been a great friend and an influence in painting for me, for sure. And so that's how that all led. And then, through Mike Lynch and Ned Jacob were good buddies. And it was like, okay, now we got to go do Ned Jacob life. And that was my art education. It was Mike Lynch and Ned Jacob and Dave Ballou. And
you took some classes with Matt Smith as well?
I did. I took one early with Matt, and it was fantastic. Matt is a really good teacher, really, really super excellent guy. And also I did one with Kevin McPherson, and also I met Scott Christensen.
Yeah, those are all good.
Yeah, they're all good. And but I just stopped shopping around. I know Matt is a student of Mike Lynch's as well. And when I talk to Matt, he always says, I wanted, to paint somewhere between Mike Lynch and Clyde Aspovic. And yeah, so
and he did.
Yeah, he did. He achieved. So anyway, that's a little bit of how, and that was back in the 90s.
When you were in that parking lot and Blue's got this painting, he's doing plein. Is he working on painting as he's doing, or is it?
No, he had. So he was part of this artist group that was, they're selling their paintings, and he had, I don't know, half dozen or a dozen paintings, and I just pointed, I'll take that one right there.
I'll take that one. And did you have any money to pay for it?
I did have some money at that time. I was, I did collect paintings for a while.
Yeah.
And I actually owned an Edgar Payne and a Hanson Duval Putta for a while.
Yeah, I bought the Putta from you, I think.
Oh, really?
I think I might have a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, it was a 1216 Arizona painting.
Yeah.
But that was how I met Dave. And
a light literally went off when you saw that painting.
It was kind of an unbelievable moment. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. I probably had started painting. I was looking at a lot of the European post-impressionists, and but I didn't know what contemporary painting was in the United States. And suddenly that's all I could look at. And I started looking at Maynard Dixon. I went to your place and found Maynard Dixon, and so I just went down the rabbit hole. And I thank my lucky stars that I did it.
And did you quit your whatever
in my
you were
30s
doing?
when I did it? I was late to the game.
Yeah, did you quit your job or whatever you were doing to make a living at that point to say, this is it, I'm burning the ships?
I went from having about 20 some odd employees down to having 2 employees, so, and then I tried to, work as little as I possibly could to make some money. And then I would do the painting, and I got a studio in the kind of industrial area of Milwaukee. And I remember bringing some paintings into this framing place. And I encountered this woman there, and she said, "Are those your paintings?" And I said, "Yes, they are." She said, "Would you like to hang your paintings in my gallery?" And that was Katie Gingras, who used to have a gallery here in Santa Fe, a beautiful gallery in Milwaukee for many years.
And so she hung your paintings, you started making some money. And what about your wife at the time? What did she think about, you've got 20 employees, you're bringing in a good living, you're succeeding, and then you say, nope, we're cutting this. I saw this painting that I bought and everything has changed for me.
Yeah. That became a conflict, and
I could see
it was a jealousy of time so we ended our relationship eventually. And it was, I realized that I lived in a way that was difficult. There was some really extremely difficult financial passages that I had to go through during that transition. And that would be hard to take a family through for sure, and a relationship that would have been tough too. But, and when we broke up finally, I was in Santa Fe at the time, and I was showing at a gallery here in Santa Fe. And I was down to, I guess, my last $1,000 or so. And I just decided that I needed to roll the dice with the universe. And so I asked the gallery, would they give me a one-man show? And they agreed to. It was the Joe Wade Fine Art Gallery here in Santa Fe. And that 2 weeks before the show was opening, I was contracting, trying to pay for my frames. And I delivered something like 45 paintings, some outrageous number. And they sold 35 paintings on the opening weekend.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that, they did that. I had been with them for a few years, and there was a little interest in me at that point, but it just kind of came out of nowhere, and it was like a lightning bolt. It was fun too. Just another aside to that opening. That was in 2002, I think. It was my mom's 70th birthday, and they were living at the time in Tucson. And so they were going to come over and see the show. And anyway, all my siblings decided that we would meet in Santa Fe on my opening, which happened to be my mom's birthday. So mom shows up at the gallery. I'm selling like all these paintings, and all my siblings arrive unbeknownst to my mom. So there's this huge party atmosphere that breaks out. And I, that was probably, I thought, well, there's no going up from here for me. So that was a remarkable experience, and a very fond memory, to be sure.
Because sometimes it's the smallest pieces that can be, pivotal in the story. Whether, and when I think about that, I think of Dixon's little portrait drawing that he, sent to Remington, when he's 15 years old.
The one in the show.
Yeah,
first one in the
show. That was critical to his formation of who he was and what he was.
I'm trying to recall. Is that in your collection?
Yeah.
How in the world did you get that?
Well, we had it in the museum for 25 years, actually, hanging, and I was fortunate enough to buy it from John and Dixon.
You bought it from John?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Wow.
And so Dixon clearly liked it too and hung on to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've literally had that piece for 25 years showing it, and I was fortunate enough to, be able to add it to our museum collection. And they wanted it seen too. Clearly, John really, I think, felt it was important that pieces like that, end up in museums and get seen.
Uh-huh. They were both interested in that.
Yeah.
And we worked with them for a number of years.
Yeah,
and,
Daniel and John. Mm-hmm.
And they were both. They both realized the contribution that both of their parents made.
Yeah.
And they both realized the cost that it came to them personally.
Yes, that's right.
And
being the children of very creative, strong-willed people is not an easy task.
But it was interesting, Mark, that I sensed I had a chance to meet with John. I don't know how many years ago, but he was expressing. You felt the pride he took, although he was anxious to tell you the pain.
Oh yeah,
but the pride that he felt in what his parents, both of them, had accomplished in their lives. And
how could you not, I guess, really?
How could you not? On the other hand, some of the things he told us were so horribly painful.
Yeah, the boarding school was really a tough one
and
for
he
them.
described, that they would, the fear that him and Daniel would have when their parents would say, "Oh, we've met some new people. We want you to meet," and then they would know,
right?
Oh,
yeah, we're gone.
Are we going to go with you, or
yeah?
And they'd leave them.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how long. He described those. But the more important thing was, I think through their lives, they worked through that and said, yeah, but look what they did.
Yeah.
Maybe it came at a cost, but...
I think it did. I think, at least I can talk for John, I think, to some extent. But he got to a point, John did, in maturity, that he realized life's tough and there's a lot of tough decisions. And I don't, when Dixon was around, he was there. He was present. He was all engaged. But the problem was he wasn't there a lot because he would go out for 6 months at a time sometimes.
Yeah, you wouldn't tell him how long you'd be gone.
I mean, Dorothea was just like, well, he's gone. He'll be back. And
imagine the communications,
There was none.
I guess the expectation now is, in a few hours, if you haven't heard from somebody, you start getting going, what's going on? But he might say, I'll be gone for a few weeks. And it's a few months.
And he's going out into places that are dangerous.
Yeah, we don't know where he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a story I think it's in Thunderbird Remembered, where the boys threw their sleeping bags up on a ledge and there were rattlesnakes there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what they remember from their childhood. You know, you could be off in the desert somewhere and never come back. I'm trying to think of the guy, the famous guy.
Ruiz, Everett Ruiz. I actually wrote, my last novel that I wrote was about a Maynard Dixon painting and Everett Ruiz.
And we still don't know what happened to him, right?
Well, if you read my novel, you can see how I thought it.
What you
well, it's a novel, so I'm not going to blow the novel.
Yeah, but that's what we're talking about.
And
you walk out in the desert.
And Dixon wrote, by the way, a poem called At Last, which is considered to be his great poem, right?
Yeah.
He wrote that after Ruiz disappeared.
Is that right?
Yeah, so that was probably done for Ruiz.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, because Ruiz's mom she actually wrote him a letter. I found the letter, saw the letter that, she's asking him, what do you think? Where's my son? Because he had met him in 32. And Dixon said, oh, don't worry about it. He's a wanderer. He'll be back. He'll touch base. But, and that was, I think, in November of 34. And by, 35, Dixon realized that, something had happened. And he knew he was not going to return. And that's right after that, he writes that At Last. Now, we don't know for a fact it was done for Ruiz, but it was done for Ruiz.
Huh.
So.
Well, that's kind of the point of it. And I think that's also, you're helping me build my case. We need people who understand these things. We do have the collection.
You do.
And we do have a responsibility. And I feel we do need some help. There are a lot of resources, some very specific.
Yes.
I would say 4 or 5 that with the right partnership and input, that we'll be able to do something that I think we'll be very proud of. And that John and Daniel would, and Maynard and Dorothea. I believe we have to include Dorothea.
Oh, absolutely.
And Edith.
Absolutely.
As what I found is at the exhibition this morning, I saw that whole big story is told, has to be told by all the characters.
That's right.
And
that's why we included in that exhibit,
Yeah.
paintings by Edith,
Yeah.
a painting that she did of Dixon, and we have Dorothea Lange photographs.
Yeah.
And, they were critically important. And Edith, if she didn't have the torch for Dixon after his death like she did, he might have been lost to history at some point.
Is that right?
I really feel that. She was such a promoter and so concerned about him, succeeding, his legacy succeeding.
Well, that's interesting.
It made a huge impact. And she was great. And John had told me on more than one occasion how wonderful a person she was.
He's told me that too. Yeah.
So, and of course, Dorothea had big influence as well in both ways. He had influence on her early on, I think, and then I think she had a tremendous influence on him during the Depression.
Yeah, I've always believed there was such a moment of synergy. As I read your book and Linda's and Dan Haggerty's book, they all tell pieces of this story. But the one that I like to believe in, and I love your comment how true it is, but it seems that she was inside the studio taking society portraits. Maybe that's not the right term.
No, that's what they were.
She was taking portraits of important people and making a living doing that. And he was out wherever. And the two things, she started walking through the streets in San Francisco, seeing the riots and the police and the problems, and started saying, there's really something I could do here. And I've always kind of believed and heard, it was my idea, that his influence of being out and seeing real things, real people, not staged, influenced her to go out and do her best work. And her social conscience, Maynard was looking for all these things in the desert. And she was basically saying, they're right outside the door here in San Francisco.
Right. That's right.
There's things happening right out the window that are representative, and that's how we got Forgotten Man. Yeah. And
that's right.
A Destination Nowhere, Nowhere to Go.
Yep.
What was really contemporary current events that were heavy on people's minds. And of course, Shapes of Fear, as we've talked about. And then the roots again, the roots were Earth Knower and Silent Hour. And he's looking at these things saying, well, there's a timelessness in the Southwest. They have a gift that you if you understood how other people live,
right,
you might live a lot better yourself.
And especially if you live with them, you really get a sense, which he did.
Which he did.
Yeah.
He's real.
Yeah, no, he and he was at the right time also to make a mark that, everybody has their time, and there's these components of people who are super important, whether it's, Matisse or a Pollock or a Dixon. But, Dixon's lives from the time before we have Custer's Last Stand. He's born in 1875. Yeah. He lives through the great earthquake of 1906.
Loses
first America. Yeah, he goes through the First World War I. He lives through the pandemic, which he almost quit painting at that time frame because of those kind of pressures. Really interesting.
Then he lives through the Depression, through World War II, through the nuclear age. And so he goes from no electricity and the natives are still completely free to the nuclear age through to that time frame. And he captured it during that whole time frame. And how many artists do that, including doing the Golden Gate Bridge and Boulder Dam, two of the three most important industrial revolutionary events
symbols
that happened in America other than the Empire State Building. He got 2 out of the 3, and he was involved
Wow,
in
that's interesting. And he lived in New York, too.
Yeah, and he lived in New York and knew all
Studied
these
in
people.
New York.
And knew all about that. So he is a very interesting person. I think you and I both feel that, the East is a place that he needs to be seen, from an exhibit standpoint in a major museum would be very important.
I feel that too. I feel that I think if we could find a museum that was interested in participating in the project, I kind of personally feel it'd have to be New York, and the other one is San Francisco.
Yeah,
his hometown, not his hometown, but
it is.
but that's where he was.
Yeah.
The character of Maynard Dixon.
Yeah, and he lived there a long time.
He lived there a long time.
Studio for a very long time.
And he had a persona there, and he had
he did have a persona.
He had a get-up.
Yeah, and it's true. And you look at somebody like Georgia O'Keeffe, and they just did a show on her outfits, Dixon cut a very unique figure, with this Texas Stetson hat and his high boots and his cane, sword cane. It
was a sword cane.
It was a sword cane with a Thunderbird on top.
Yeah.
I mean, he was not without making sure people knew who he was.
Yeah.
When he
in
walked
San Francisco.
In San Francisco and in New York City too. So he was,
he had that character in New York as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he knew Buffalo Bill. He met with Buffalo Bill.
Your card. Yeah. That was actually thrilling in the exhibition today.
Yeah, and he he knew Charles Russell came and visited him in 1908. So he knew all of the things, what was going on in America. He was very tuned in to what was contemporary art and what was going on and the concerns with it too, and how to deal with it. So he's got the chops from a historical standpoint, from a painting standpoint. And BYU has the paintings from an exhibit standpoint.
That's another thing I think to comment on is I thought you saw it clearly in your book. I think I mentioned to you that I had a conversation a few years ago with Michael Duchman at the Briscoe.
Yes.
And we were looking at contemporary Western art and pointing out, there's a Dixon follower, there's a Dixon. And that's no discovery to me, and I don't think it is to anybody in the field either.
Right.
Because I've heard, very significant artists say, I study Dixon.
Right.
But that is something I think that's well known. He's a painter's painter. If you want to learn to paint, you look at Dixon.
Yeah.
And so many people do it. Now, if you wanted to go a step further and say, well, who was a painter's painter to Dixon? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I don't think that's as clear.
Well, I think the first person for sure would have been Frederick Remington.
Remington was an inspiration.
Yeah, he was an inspiration. But in the sense that, Remington tells him in a letter, in 1890, it's fine to be an illustrator. It's a good profession. It's an honest profession. You don't have to have an education.
Yeah.
I didn't, but it would help if you do. That follow your own truths. Go to nature. Don't follow other people's ideas. Use your own.
I learned a lot from my Aunt Rose Gonzalez, who was my grandmother's sister. She lived across the street from where my grandmother lived, and so they were together literally every day.
And so
I picked it up from her.
So Rose taught you.
Yeah.
It's interesting because she has I love her, Rose Gonzalez, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I love her pottery. She had a very distinctive avenue. I can always pick out Rose's work.
Yeah, you can spot it right away.
Yeah, she was a really good potter. And what was she like?
She was pretty cool. I mean, strict as far as teaching goes. She'd give you a lump of clay and say, okay, try this. And she'd tell you, okay, mash it down, do it again. Same with polishing. She's like, watch what I'm doing, watch what I'm doing. As far as teaching goes, it's not so much where they instruct you in a certain way. They want you to visualize and see everything that's going on.
And was
Then
she,
you do that and then pick it up, and then you take those techniques and then make them your own.
and how old were you when you started working with your grandmother? Were you your aunt?
I'd say 8 or
grandmother,
9.
sister? How old?
8 or 9.
And how old was Rose at that time?
Oh, probably in her 70s.
Yeah, I would think so. I never met her, actually.
Very nice lady.
Yeah. And so she started working with you just as a little kid. And did you have this sense that you wanted to do it, or was the clay was calling you?
Yeah, from that point on, I decided that's what I wanted to do.
I
went to school, got really, really high grades. My senior year, I didn't have to go to school at all because I got all my credits in my junior year. So I just go to school, check in, and then leave for home and do whatever else we were doing.
And so were your parents okay? I mean, your grandfather was a painter, but were they okay with you becoming a potter?
Yeah, they were okay with it, especially my grandmother. She was very, very supportive. It's like I got accepted to NYU, ASU, a few other schools to go study law. And then 2 weeks before graduation, I was like, I don't want to do that. So I want to stick with clay.
So you graduated from high school, and where did you go to high school?
Milwaukee High School.
Milwaukee High School. And what year was that you graduated?
81.
So you graduated in 81, and then you go to college. Is that right?
Yeah, I went to the College of Santa Fe and then St. John's here in Santa Fe.
Yeah. And what was your major at that time?
Well, it was flipping back and forth. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study there. And by that point, I already knew it was art.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was selling quite a bit to Anita Day.
Mm.
You know, she had the studio at the Pueblo.
Right.
So another thing going back earlier is one day when I was about 12, I did a group of pots, and I put them outside my grandma's house where I lived also to sell. Anita came over, and she told me, I want you to start bringing everything you make. So I started taking them to her. And at that point, I was doing strictly black on black wear. And so it was her and Tony Day that came out. And they're the ones that introduced me to black on sienna. And then one day Anita reached out into her shop and took some hishi down. Said, okay, I want you to start using this. And so they're the ones that pushed me in this direction.
And how old would you have been when that happened?
I was about 12.
You were really young.
Yeah.
And so, and Tony, how old was he?
I'm not too sure.
Yeah, because he died, or he got in his bad accident in like 82, I think.
Yeah.
And but you worked with him, and he was. Would you consider him to be a mentor at all?
Yeah, because like I said, they're the ones that showed me about incising, about inlay, and a lot of techniques like that.
And did you know Maria? She died in.
I knew Maria quite well.
Yes. And what was she like?
She was pretty nice, from what I remember. She was a very nice woman. She would look at some of my pots too and say, okay, you can do this, you can do that, push it this way.
And were there that many men that were making pots? Clearly Tony was doing it and succeeding greatly.
Well, there were men that helped a lot with the pots and worked on pots, but they didn't sign them.
Right. Like Julian, of course, was, critically important to Maria's work.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand from what people talk about at home is that men always worked on pots, but it was Hewitt and those guys that pushed the women to sign the pots because they thought of it as being women's work, not men's work.
Yeah, Edward.
Men belonged outside, women belonged inside.
And
the men always helped with the pots. I mean, when you build a big pot, you need somebody to help you with it.
Right, right. And so you didn't feel any pressure that, okay, I'm being a potter and I'm a man. This is not an odd thing.
Oh no, not at all. We were encouraged.
Yeah, that's good. That's excellent.
It's like whoever was doing well with it, they encouraged you to do it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And those early pots that you were making, these little black on black pots, how did you sign those?
Well, several signatures. Russell Sanchez, Teo Wing, my Indian name. Teo Wing.
And would that be just?
Hold on one second.
Okay. This is the fun of a podcast when you're doing it somewhere else.
This here is one of the earliest pieces that I made.
Oh yeah, lift it up a little higher. Okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah, I can.
And this is dated. It doesn't have a date, but 1981.
Oh, that's cool. Oh yeah, so if we'll get Charles, if he would take a photo and send that to us, Charles, and we'll put it on the YouTube channel with it.
Okay, and then this one, Best of Show, and a blue ribbon at the Herd Museum show that year.
And that was 1981, that particular pot?
Yeah.
And is that for sale?
No.
No, it's just one. Is that one you brought in?
Well, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to have a picture of it, let's put it up and we can show people, including the signature. It would be nice to have that.
Okay, but this is one of the earliest ones, and I worked on this with Anita. She's the one that helped me a lot. And actually for this piece, she's the one that gave me the stones.
Yeah, lift it up just a little higher. Yeah, so it's got sienna, little areas of sienna, carved fish with turquoise inlay, and then carved
feather designs and water serpent in the front.
Sgraffito. So when you do that sienna on that, if you can tell us, if it's okay to tell us, how do you do the sienna? How do you achieve that?
Well, after it's fired, you have to fire very high in order to achieve the sienna. Otherwise, it'll crack.
Mm-hmm.
So after it's fired, then you put it in the stove for at least 2 hours at a very high temperature to heat the pot all the way through again.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll take a blowtorch and just slowly expose the color.
Mm.
You do too much, it's going to crack on you. So you've got to go really slow with it. Let it cool down, put it back in the oven, take it out and do it again.
Yeah. And does that happen where it cracks on a?
Oh yeah, it'll crack. Sometimes they crack.
Yeah.
Try to rush it, it's going to crack.
Yeah. What does that feel like when you put all this energy, effort, you're getting toward the end, you're doing the finishing things basically to the slip and then crack?
Oh, you just feel like, oh, well, wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you're taught early on that you're going to lose a lot of pots during the process. So
yes,
you just learn to accept it and deal with it.
Yes. And when did you get to the point where you could actually accept it and deal with it?
Maybe by the time I was 18, 19, 20.
Yeah. I would think it'd be a very hard thing. It's like pulling in a fish and right at the last minute, every freaking time it breaks the line and all you have. And you're like, I had the fish. It was there.
Yeah.
Except it's more than even a fish because it's your creativity and it's money, right? I mean, this is how you survive, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you do with
but
those?
we're also told that when pots crack and they break, they belong to the spirits.
And so what do you do with the remains of a pot like that?
We usually break them and take them out.
Yeah.
Or we save them and use them for certain ceremonies. And when somebody passes away, we put those pots in with them.
I love that. Oh yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great way.
So they're always used. And then we're always told that pots are like people, nobody's perfect and nothing's perfect. So
yeah. I remember Luann DeVoy, I was at her house once and she had this huge pot. It must have been 25 inches tall. And she had, when she had made the pot, she had made it too thin on the bottom and there was a little hole. And I asked her what she was going to do with it because it was ready to fire. She goes, no, I'm going to break it up and it's going back in the river. And I thought, wow, all that work. And and it was fireable for sure. But it wasn't up to her standards. And I love that about her. And I love that about yours. You don't normally at market, you might not have a lot of pots, but every one of them is a little gem, usually filled with lots of ribbons as well. Do you have any idea how many ribbons you've won? It must be just a box load.
I actually have 2 giant containers full of ribbons.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't think I've ever been to your booth, and I've been going to market for almost 30 years, that I didn't see a cadre of ribbons, usually blue ones or purple ones, at your booth. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But you've never won Best of Show, is that right?
Not in my adult life, no.
Yes.
I've come very, very close, but to me, that's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
It's just making sure the pieces come out right and they're up to standards and that people appreciate them.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I like about the market is seeing people's reaction.
Yeah. And you can't, as having been a judge, you can't control that anyway, best of show. It's literally who's in the room judging. If they're part
Yeah, at that time. It
Yeah,
could be
that's right.
anything.
It could be anything. Yeah. But you consistently get the blue ribbons. In fact, I'm trying to think if I've ever seen you there on Sunday.
No.
Always sold out by Saturday, right? Pretty much.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Some friends of mine own Oaxaca restaurant, and they asked me to manage it because they were moving to Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for a while, and then they sold it. So I stayed on as a waitress. Miserable job.
I bet.
And
Yeah, how'd you feel at that time? I mean, you have this artistic, creative ability, and you're serving food as a waitress.
well, you know what I do? I do paintings and put them on the wall in the restaurant and sell them while I was waiting tables.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What were the images of?
Mostly portraits.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And there was one fellow that came in and he said, "Oh, you're an artist. You should think about working at our foundry. We have a foundry here in town. We need artists." So I sort of thought, oh, well, and I went to work at another restaurant. I stayed home a few days to get my wisdom teeth pulled.
Mm-hmm.
And they called me and said, you don't need to come back. The lady we hired to take your place is a lot faster waitress than you are.
Wow.
I was devastated because by then I was a single parent.
So you and how long had you been a single parent?
Not very long,
Yeah.
like 6 months or so.
Yeah.
So I was pretty upset. So
And you had how many kids? 3 kids?
3, but the 2 older ones had already kind of moved on.
Yeah, they graduated.
But it was my daughter and I who was a teenager by then.
Yes.
So then I remembered the foundry. So I went and applied for a job there. And the owner said, no, women can't do this. Never hired women. It's men's work. It's hard. It's heavy. It's dirty. So I went back 3 times.
Uh-huh.
And he finally said, okay, we'll try you for a month.
Yeah.
If you don't make it, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, and he said, we only have 1 bathroom. And I said, I don't care as long as the door locks, So
What year was this that you did
that
this?
was 70.
Yeah, right at 70. Okay.
No, I'm
A
sorry,
little later,
80.
1980.
Yeah, 80.
And-
So I went to work there, and I loved it. It was a whole new world. It was kind of dark and smoky, exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And, the guys that worked there were all NAU sculpture students
Mm-hmm.
that had graduated. And they were so great, and they taught me to do it. And I tried to learn really fast. So he kept me on.
You were faster at that than food.
Much better.
Yeah. You were happy.
I was happy.
Yeah. You weren't doing it for a paid check so much
Yeah.
as to just trying to learn and be an artist, right?
Yeah, but at that time, I thought, I'm a painter. I have no interest in being a sculptor.
Mm.
But the man that owned it, Bill Woodruff, was very nice and said, you can use the foundry. Everybody can if you pay for your materials. And so it took me about a year to even try. And the guys would say, stay after work and sculpt with us. We all make things.
Mm-hmm.
And finally I did. And then I went and took a class up at NAU, Anatomy
Mm-hmm.
for Sculptors, which was a great class. And they'd all taken it. And so you learned all the muscles and attachments and bones and everything. So
Was the real reason that you chose to do the sculpture is because availability and you could have the access to make it?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Because it costs a lot to have things cast, and to get together a body of work to show a gallery, you can't just take one piece in.
No, it's true.
So
Did you think of yourself as an artist at this point?
not really.
No.
I thought I was a foundry worker. And I liked being a foundry worker. That was fine.
What did you do? What was your job as a foundry
I did
worker?
everything. I did waxes, made molds. I was a chaser for a while, which is not a fun job.
Yeah, tell people what a chaser is.
After the piece is cast, the chasers sit at a bench and grind off the gates, which were channels for the bronze to fill the piece, and retexture where it was so people can't see.
Right.
Do a lot of welding, a lot of grinding. You get bronze splinters all over you. And in the summer, that's hot and itchy. But mostly wax room, and I love touching up waxes. That was nice.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And that means that they have a wax model of the sculpture.
which
and
came out of the mold.
Right.
It has a seam line.
And so you clean up all the little details.
Right. Sometimes you have to put like horse legs back on. Anything that sticks out that has to be cut off before the mold. So you have to touch it up so it doesn't show where it joined. So it was kind of nice work. It was pleasant.
And you got to meet other artists too, lots of
And
other
that
artists.
was the best part.
I would think that would be the best part.
That was,
Those are your kindred spirits that you just don't know
and
it.
these guys were Joe Beeler, Johnny Hampton.
And they all pretty much were guys, probably, weren't they? That you're
Mostly.
seeing? Yeah.
Yeah, most all were men. And Johnny would buy us all tickets to go to the Cowboy Artist show every year.
Wow.
And
That was Johnny Hampton?
yeah, and we'd all sit at his table.
Wow.
I mean, he was so good to us.
That really is. That is exceptional.
So I got exposed to this whole wonderful Western art world, and Joe was great. When I first started, I'd take my sculptures over to his house, and he'd critique them for me.
Wow.
And so that went on for 9 years.
So you were working at the foundry for 9 years, and after about a year when you first started, you started making your
Doing my
first.
own, yeah.
And what kind of imagery were you doing at that point?
The first one I did was 3 prairie dogs, just a paperweight size.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Still have that one?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And then they got bigger, and then
But the West was what you saw as being your subject
that's
matter.
what I loved.
Yeah.
You know? If you do what you love, it's easy.
And so after you said 9 years you worked there?
Uh-huh.
And then
And I topped out at $6.50 an hour.
Oh,
And
gosh.
so artists would come in and say, I don't like that mouth that I did. Would you fix it for me in clay or in wax? I
Yes.
can fix it. And here they are doing well, and I'm making $6.50 an hour, and it just seemed like this is not fair.
Right.
I need to get. And then my friend Buck McCain.
Yes.
You know Buck?
I do.
He used that foundry too, and he said, "You got to get out of here. You just got." So he said, "Get up an hour early every day and draw everything you see. Send me the drawings. I'll look them over, send them back to you, and when I think you're ready to quit, I'll tell you." So that's what happened.
Wow. And how long did he do that for you?
Oh, about 6 months.
And you'd get up every morning and draw?
And did, yeah. And so it would have been too big a step to take when you're, a single parent, not to have a paycheck. So
Yeah, no, right.
yeah. So I did. Got in a gallery in Tlaquepaque in Sedona, and they were people that had waited on as a waitress, so I knew them.
Yeah.
And then a couple years later, I was up at Mountain Trails Gallery, and the lady that managed it said, "Oh, I know you. Gosh, you want to be in the gallery? Wow, are you kidding?" So Ken Payne set me up with a sculpture stand and loaned me a Navajo saddle for my first piece, and just started the whole thing. Then I got to do a big sculpture of Sedona Schnebley.
I don't know who that is.
She's the lady the namesake of
Okay.
Sedona. She was an early pioneer. And they had a competition, and I won. So I got to do, this was in 95, 94. I got to do a big sculpture of her, which is in front of our library still.
Okay. I'll have to go see that.
That made a huge difference.
Yeah, I bet. Now all of a sudden people know who you are.
Yeah.
And they're probably selling it to Tlaquepaque galleries. And
Yeah, they sold maquettes to make money to pay for the big one. It's 10 feet high. And the art center there in town let me use their art barn room because it had a high ceiling. So I worked on it all summer, and it became like kind of a community project because all the locals would come in and
Sure.
visit.
Yeah.
I'd get them to model hands and everything. And it was a nice project. It was good. And it really helped me too. And then I did Sonawa piece for Uptown Sedona, which you have a small version
Yes.
of that here.
And that's in the heart of Sedona, right?
Uptown, we call it.
How tall is that sculpture?
Oh, well, I don't know. What is it? It's life size, so it's about almost 6 feet or more with a base. But
And that was inspired from Hopi friends, wasn't it? Or the models?
Hopi models.
Yeah.
And my friend Kate modeled for it, and she's still my best friend.
That's funny.
We get to go up to dances at Moan Kopi. And yeah, she was 25, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, what does she think when she sees herself in
I think
bronze
she's
like
happy
that?
with it.
Yeah?
Yeah. She's an artist herself. She watercolors, and She's in the Hopi show every year up at the Museum of Northern Arizona, and does well.
Very good.
Has her own salon in Cornville.
Uh-huh.
Her husband's a school teacher. So all these people and all these things just came together at the right time. I still can't believe it.
I learned a lot. That first rug was a learning experience because I learned that there were different techniques as far as joining your colors where the colors meet. You can have stack joints or you can have hook joints. I was using stack joints like my grandma used. When I got halfway through it, I found that there were hook joints that you can use. So I started doing the hook joints. So that first rug has the combination of the two, stack joints and hook joints. But as time went on, I finished that rug. I did another striped rug.
What did you do with that rug?
My cousin has it. My cousin owns it. She goes, I want to own your first rug.
Did she buy it or did you
She
give
bought
to
it. She bought it for
her?
$20. Now that I think back on it, I think I should have probably kept that rug. But
Well, you kind of do in a way.
yeah, you
in the
kind of
family.
do. But at the same time, it would have probably ended up at the bottom of the closet somewhere. But the second rug I made is it was beige. This is all leftover yarn. Beige, a dark gray, and it had 3 red butterflies in the middle. And actually, Mark Botti still owns that rug. It's still in his shop. It's the second. I think it's the second rug I ever made.
Did you get more than 20, I hope?
Yes, I got more than 20. It was a larger rug, and maybe it was about the length of this table here.
Did you know you were hooked after that first rug that you go, I think I got to do this?
No, it took some time.
Yeah.
I knew that, ever since everything I've ever done, whether it was working in parking and transportation here at the U of A for a short time, or working at Buffalo Exchange here for Kirsten and Spencer Block, everything always led me back to art. It was something that I always knew I wanted to do. It's one of those things that when you have a bad day or you have a frustrating day, you go and you walk into a museum and it makes everything all better again.
Yeah.
So having that sort of cushion, you knew that there was something about art that you were eventually going to go into. So, yeah.
So you finished your second rug.
I finished my second rug. Then I was determined that I was going to learn. So I kept at it and kept at it.
Did you go to your
trying different
grandmother and
things.
ask questions or watch
No.
her, or you just did this all on your own?
No, because these were all things that I did on my own. I asked a lot of questions of other weavers, but I was experimenting a lot, which is probably the best thing I did for myself because eventually, after I finished maybe my first 10 rugs or so, I took classes. And then I was talking to other weavers. But always when I talked to these other people, they will always tell me the things that I couldn't do or can't do or isn't going to be possible. And by doing my own thing, I discovered wedge weaving. I learned how to blend colors, splitting ply, rejoining colors, and then weaving. All of these have technical names that I didn't know had names. And now when I come across other people who are weavers, not just Navajo weavers, but tapestry weavers of other cultures, they tell me that they have names, in particular French tapestry weavers, because I think the French are prevalent. They have a prevalent art for tapestry weaving. But I guess they have a museum in France called the Aubusson Museum in France, and they have a lot of pictorial weavings there. But most of the stuff I learned about pictorial weaving, I learned on my own.
Did you find it, because you're a male weaver, and it's generally a female, at least for the Dene, it's mainly a woman's area. Did you find any pushback on that, or was it just the opposite, and you felt like more inclusive because you were doing it?
Well, quite the contrary. Actually, I found it quite the contrary because my first experiences with selling my rugs that wasn't to anybody I knew, a relative. I was told about R.V. Burnham Trading Company, and that's how I got to meet the Burnhams, Bruce and Sherry, his daughter, and Virginia, his wife. So before then, I hadn't been buying my yarn from them. What had happened was they my cousin told me about a rug auction that was happening in Flagstaff. So I took my rugs over there, and some of my pictorial pieces had curved lines, in particular my birds, and it was something that I discovered on my own.
Oh, wow.
So what I would do is I would
eccentric weave.
I would weave the curve.
Yeah, which is very difficult to do.
First, with the outside yarn. Then I would lay the weft across the curve.
Yes.
So rather than having the jagged line, it gave me a smooth line on the inside belly of the bird.
Yes.
And so they said, "How did you do that?" And I said,
bet they did.
I said, "I don't know. I just did it." Little did I knew it's a type of what do they call it? There's a type of it's called
It's an eccentric weave is what the weave itself is.
yeah, and it smooths out the lines, and I think it's called man, I can't think of it right this instant, but it smoothed out the lines, and I did the bird, and the bird's sitting on a branch, and that rug I didn't sell right off, but it did get the attention of Sherry Burnham, because not too long after that the family had a rug auction at Canyonlands Natural History Park up in Moab, and they wanted a weaver to weave delicate arch.
Yeah, that's tough.
So they gave me a picture, and she says, "Come to the store and pick out some colors, and we'll get you set up, and you can weave it." So that's when I discovered their shop, and she gave me the weavings, and I didn't know the first thing about shopping for weaving. I had yarn in 2 different sizes. I had number 2 and number 1, very different in size. Number 2 is very thin. Number 1 is a thicker yarn. So I made it work though, but it added an interesting texture to the piece. The area that was that I had done in the thinner yarn had a very tight weft and was give a very different surface texture to the area that had a thicker yarn. So you had these areas that were falling back into space, and then you had the delicate arch. But the colors that I picked were based on, I used color theory, like purples and blues for the cooler.
Yeah, and you do that a lot, actually. I noticed that colors.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the oranges and the yellows were the warmer colors. So, and then I put the landscape in the background of like a mountain landscape, and I put stylized clouds over the top. And I sold that rug. That was a rug that I sold for the most at that time. So it kind of set a standard from there on out.
Did you go at that time, okay, now I'm a weaver?
Not yet.
Or were you still working at the clinic?
I wasn't working at the clinic, but then I had quit my job. But then I had a little bit more confidence. I guess it wasn't until I was posting pictures of my weavings on Facebook, and I guess there were other weavers on Facebook as well. It caught their attention. Then I started being invited to private groups who had weaving groups here and there. Then I was invited to participate in the Navajo. It was a Navajo conference, and it happened in Santa Fe. But it was a Navajo. It's a community organization type conference, but a part of it was a symposium that was put together by Jill Alberg-Yo, who was working for SLAM, St. Louis Art Museum at the time, and now she works for the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, which is a museum in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I lectured on it on Navajo textiles.
Yeah, and so
as a matter of fact.
She put together this symposium that was called Weaving the Clouds, and she invited, I knew who all these weavers were because I had studied
Like D.Y. Begay and
D.Y. Begay,
Cody.
Barbara Rogers, Melissa Cody. Yeah. I don't think Lola Cody was there, but I think she was invited, but Melissa Cody was there. I think Mary Lou Schultz was there. Then there was... There were several noted weavers there that I knew who they were. I knew who they were.
Right.
But I was among the group who was invited, so I felt very fortunate. That's when I felt like I was a weaver.
And how long ago was that, would you say?
That was like 6 years ago.
And were you doing the pictorial elements like you do break dancers, you do skaters and things like that?
Not quite that sophisticated.
Yeah.
I was beginning to use single type elements, and I still do. focus on single type elements, but I'll add in other things. But then I was actually starting to do portraiture in my work, 3-dimensional portraiture, and in the work that I was doing.
That's amazing stuff too. And so, when you do a rug now, do you have an idea? Okay, this is what I want. Something strikes you and go, "This is what I want to do." Imagery wise,
I guess you could say that. A lot of times, it's not like I don't approach it like this is what I want to do. It's more like, I wonder if I can do that. That's the question that pops up first. I've been really infatuated recently with ripples in water. I think I've seen some weavers attempt it a while back, and some other weavings that I had seen, but it's a trick of color really to get water right.
and is it just ripples?
It's like weaving chrome. Ripples in water, like looking at a pond, and you see, because it's
Monet
not
kind of thing.
That's not a flat color.
Right.
It's reflecting all the color around it.
And can you tell what you're looking at? Have you done one of these yet?
I've attempted to. I've done some sample type work, like little swatches, like studies, but I haven't done a complete weaving with that.
That sounds fascinating. Yeah, and tough.
It's tough because it's something you have to think about from top to bottom.
Oh, yeah.
With most rugs, what I'm doing is when I'm weaving a composition, I start weaving the rug, but it's not with a reflection. You have to think about the image from the top down, but you almost have to do the sketches first and then start putting the color in.
And do you do drawings or use photographs or anything to help you with this?
Some of my work I do drawings. The works that have a lot of movement in them, that have full body, I'll do sketches before.
Do you save those?
I do. I do save them. And actually,
some
of them,
those are important to have.
Yeah, some of those I think I'm going to be donating to the Heard Museum too, because I have they call it my box. I have a box at the Heard Museum. It's in their library. So I don't know, 20 years down the road, if I ever have a retrospective, it'll be somewhere where they can take reference to.
People are now blinded by ideology. And what I mean by that is we're in an era, and I know this maybe is old-fashioned, but it's okay. I have a foot in the 20th century, and I've got a good foot in the 21st century. Ideology, gender, identity, race, critical critique of society. And that becomes the issue for putting a show together. Now, sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Oftentimes, it does not. And I'll go on the record and say this. I was horrified by the new installation of the Museum of Modern Art. Even though many people are waxing poetic and singing praises, it was the most jumbled, confusing installation I ever saw in my life. Did I understand some of the reasons behind it? Yes. Did it work? No. Halfway through, I said to my friend Jack, I really seen enough. I'll have to come back here again, but my brain is scrambled. I can't handle this anymore. Now, what was wrong? Context, juxtaposition, inferior artists being put next to masters. And, it's not a nice thing, right? In an age of equality, we should say something is mediocre. But if it is mediocre, why is it there? I just saw a show at the Phillips, and I'm on the process this week, and I'm going to have it done before I leave Tuesday. I'm reviewing a show called Riffs and Relations, something like the influence of modernism on African-American artists. It's not a good show.
And what makes it not a good show?
the hanging selection of works and the absence of some really good artists, such as Carrie Mae Weems, Sam Gilliam, Adrian Piper, and too much focus on the body. But when we think about modernism wasn't about figuration.
Just the opposite, really.
It was the liberation, yes, to break rules, shift things around. I agree with that. But when a show focuses so much on the body, you're, can you say? Cutting your nose to spite your face?
Mm-hmm. And was that on both ends, both on the modern art that they're comparing it to the contemporary artists? They were both show the artists that they're showing in juxtaposition of this in this show. Was
there were great artists in
timelessly?
the show, but some of the artists were imitating the masters. Now, I'm not in agreement that we should be showing a white lily white, but since the 80s, there are so many great African American artists, from Taser Gates, David Hammonds,
Leonardo Drew.
I mean, I could make you a list of 20 artists. I'm reading now the curator's essay to try to really steep myself in her intention, and I'll finish that today before I start writing, because I really want to get in her head. But to me, this is a case in point where identity and ideology could be blinding. It's my humble opinion.
And so this brings up a point for me, and that's being an art critic, because you do this professionally and you've done it for a while. I find it to be a very, first of all, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I have the ability to do this profession. But I'm curious how you go about critiquing a show, because going in, you have to be a referee is what you have to. And I guess I was a referee in college, so I did do that. So maybe I do understand it better than I think. But you have to be a referee in the sense that you have to give, you have to wear no blinders. You have to call it as you see it, regardless of the outcome. And that has to be tough sometimes, because these could be friends, colleagues, professional individuals, people of power. And if you destroy or give a negative review, it can affect them, right?
Well, number one, I don't review shows of friends.
Okay.
Number two, when I curate, I don't include friends, or if I do, I always mention something as a disclaimer.
Yeah, you give a disclaimer.
I would not review colleagues at Carnegie Mellon, much to people's chagrin. I'm too close.
Right.
And when you say you don't enter any show neutral. We all have a bias.
It's true, we do.
We have a bias, no matter how you want to say you don't, you have it. I know exactly my aesthetic. And sometimes when I turn myself off, I have a conversation with myself and say, stop it. You have to look again. Now, if I really am appalled or just don't like it, and I did that last fall, I did not find the last Carnegie International a stimulating show. Halfway through, I went to the cafeteria and I called my editor again, and I said to her, I can't review the show, get another writer. Because I said, I don't want to write a piece where I'll just be negatively ranting. The show for me doesn't warrant my time. Why? Again, it was a jumble. There was a lot of mediocre work, even though there were some really good artists in it, like Mel Bachner. But there were other things that just didn't work. So
what makes a good show?
it all depends. I just think...
Does it start with the premise of the show to begin with?
I think there has to be a good narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I think the curator has to be open in trying to... A good show is a problem. It's problem solving. You come up with a concept. When you're doing a retrospective of one artist, that's different. If you're doing a group show, you have to say, okay, I did a show when I first became director of the Art Museum at Carnegie Mellon. And I thought it would be fun in this explosion of figurative German art and neo-expressionism, blah, to do a show on, well, what is happening with abstract art. And I did a show called Abstraction. And I did a selection of Sam Gilliam.
Mm-hmm.
It's another fine African-American artist, who, by the way, is not in the show at the Phillips. The abstraction was very diverse. There wasn't one kind of abstract art. I had David Reed in it. I had Emily Chang. I had Stephen Westfall. I had Kathy Montgomery, who was a regional artist of Pittsburgh. The work was very different. But what you were trying to do is take and stretch what is happening. And then I used as an anchor Sam Gilliam's work as a earlier modernist abstractionist in juxtaposing with all these emerging younger people. And it wasn't like looking for formalism, or it was really trying to see what is out there. Sharon Gold was in that show. A lot of interesting people, and their work was very dissimilar. Another thing I believe in, don't do a group show with one example.
What do you mean when you say that?
Your audience can't comprehend enough to see one picture. If you have two
I got
or
it.
three,
You need to have a
you're
compilation
giving them,
of the...
yes, they're beginning to see how this artist thinks. One individual picture is not enough.
I agree with that.
I want to delve. Was it a successful show? I think so. And we did a catalog. It's another thing I really believe in. If you're going to do a good show, do a catalog.
I agree.
The show goes away in 6 to 8 weeks, and there's nothing left. But the catalog exists.